The blackthorn forest was deathly quiet, the kind of silence that unnerved even the bravest. Towering trees with knotted roots loomed in the dense mist, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. This was the last sanctuary of Ethan Graves, the last human hunted by the alien race known as the Darnok. But tonight, Ethan wasn't alone. Ethan crouched low behind a jagged outcrop of rock, his breathing measured and controlled. His face bore the scars of countless battles, souvenirs of a resistance long since crushed. His survival wasn't due to luck, but sheer grit and ingenuity. A crude spear, its tip laced with venom from a forest creature, rested in his calloused hands. The soft hum of alien drones searching the forest for him drifted through the still air. There, close, came a low growl from behind him. Ethan glanced over his shoulder at Cale Ironclaw, a massive werewolf with fur like burnished steel and eyes that glowed amber in the darkness. Cale's muscles rippled under his thick hide as he sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring. 6 of them, maybe 7. They're spread thin, but their scent reeks of overconfidence. Overconfidence is a weakness, Ethan muttered. It's also a trap, another voice whispered, smooth as velvet and sharp as a blade. Lucius Drax emerged from the shadows, his pale skin almost luminous against the darkened forest. The vampire's crimson eyes gleamed with a predator's intellect. He adjusted the cuff of his black coat, appearing unerringly composed for the gravity of their situation. Lucius's gaze swept across the clearing. Krark wouldn't send his best warriors first. These are fodder. Scouts meant to draw us out, to test the forest. He smirked, revealing the faint glint of fangs. They'll regret underestimating us. Ethan tightened his grip on the spear. We make our stand here. No retreat. We finish this squad. Send a message to Krark. Cale growled approvingly, but Lucius raised an eyebrow. Bold, Ethan, but reckless. If we draw too much attention, we might be overwhelmed. We won't survive by running, Ethan said, his voice firm. The forest gives us an edge, but only if we use it. We've got their tech against them. The traps are set. Now we strike. Cale sniffed the air again, his claws flexing in anticipation. They're moving in, for coming from the east. The rest circling wide. Lucius tilted his head, listening. Typical Darnok strategy. They're arrogant enough to think we'll panic and scatter. They don't know what they're walking into, Ethan said, a flicker of determination flashing in his eyes. The first Darnok scout appeared through the trees, its insectoid frame shimmering in the faint glow of its scanning visor. Tall and spindly, it moved with a predatory grace, its 6 limbs ending in sharp claws. Behind it, 3 more emerged, their black exoskeletons gleaming like polished armor. Ethan remained perfectly still as the aliens drew closer. Lucius had draped him and Cale in cloaks smeared with a concoction that masked their heat signatures, rendering them invisible to the Darnok sensors. Cale tensed, his muscles coiled like a spring. Ethan raised a hand, signaling him to wait. Timing was everything. When the lead Darnok stepped into the clearing, its clawed foot triggered a tripwire. A spiked log, camouflaged by leaves, swung down from the trees, slamming into the alien with a sickening crunch. The other Darnok hissed in alarm, their weapons glowing as they charged up plasma shots. That was their second mistake. Cale exploded from the shadows with a thunderous roar, barreling into the nearest alien. His claws tore through its armor like paper. The alien's shriek cut short as it collapsed under the werewolf's weight. Before the others could react, Lucius darted into the fray, a blur of movement. His fingers extended into razor-sharp talons, slicing through another scout's neck in one fluid motion. The alien collapsed, its weapon clattering to the ground. Ethan took aim at the remaining 2. His spear flew true, embedding itself in one Darnok's chest. The alien convulsed before crumpling, its glowing visor dimming. The last scout backed away, emitting a high-pitched chirp, a distress signal. Not so fast, Lucius hissed. He lunged, catching the alien by the throat before it could flee. His strength was deceptively immense, and with a savage twist, He silenced the scout forever. Ethan moved swiftly, retrieving his spear as Kale sniffed the air once more. Two more coming in from the west, the werewolf said, his ears twitching. They'll find their friends dead and call for backup, Lucius said, flicking alien blood from his claws. This is far from over. Ethan nodded. Good. Let them come. We've set enough traps to make this forest their graveyard. The trio regrouped, their bond forged in desperation and mutual respect. Kale's primal instincts, Lucius's calculated cunning, and Ethan's unwavering resolve made them a formidable force. Together, they had survived battles that should have claimed their lives many times over. As the mist thickened and the forest seemed to close in, Ethan allowed himself a grim smile. The Darnock thought they were the hunters. Tonight, they would learn what it meant to be hunted. The faint hum of more drones echoed in the distance. Kale growled, Lucius smirked, and Ethan readied his spear once more. Let's give them something to fear, Ethan said. The trio melted back into the shadows of Blackthorn Forest, the darkness embracing them like an old friend. The hunt was far from over, and vengeance was just beginning. The Blackthorn Forest was alive in ways the Darnock couldn't comprehend. Its gnarled roots and overgrown foliage concealed countless dangers, each one carefully engineered by its three defenders. Ethan, Kale, and Lucius had turned the forest into a labyrinth of death, a place where every shadow held a trap, and every sound could be the last thing the aliens heard. As the second wave of Darnock forces descended, their arrogance remained unshaken. They advanced in a tight formation, their glowing visors scanning the darkness for movement. Drones buzzed overhead, their beams slicing through the mist, but the forest seemed to conspire against them. Branches swayed to block their view, and the dense fog thickened as if alive. Kale crouched on a thick tree limb, his claws silently digging into the bark. His keen senses picked up the sound of alien footsteps below, accompanied by the faint hum of their energy rifles. 4 in a cluster. North quadrant, he growled, his voice barely audible. Lucius stood nearby, perched with the grace of a predator ready to pounce. He nodded, his crimson eyes locked on the advancing soldiers. They're confident. They think brute force will get them through. Let's show them otherwise. Ethan remained on the ground, hidden behind a curtain of vines. From his position, he could see the glowing eyes of the Darnock through the haze. He signaled silently to his companions, his hand movements deliberate and precise. Trigger the vines, he whispered. Kale reached out and tugged the concealed line. A trap sprang to life as thick. Thorn vines snapped free from their bindings, whipping through the air like serpents. The Darnock soldiers reacted too late. 2 were ensnared immediately, their armor punctured by the thorn's toxic coating. Their screams echoed through the forest as the poison did its work, corroding their exoskeletons and reducing them to lifeless husks. The remaining 2 opened fire, their plasma shots sizzling through the vines, but Lucius was already in motion. He dropped from the tree with unnatural speed, his talons slicing clean through one alien's weapon before it could be raised. In one fluid motion, he plunged his claws into the creature's chest, ending its struggle. The last soldier turned to flee, but Kale was faster. He leaped from his perch, landing with a bone-crushing thud on the Darnock's back. With a single swipe of his claws, he silenced the alien. Ethan emerged from the shadows, his face grim but focused. 4 down. More will come. Lucius wiped his hands clean on a rag he carried, his expression calm. Let them. The forest has teeth, and they haven't even seen its worst yet. As if on cue, the hum of drones intensified. A new squad entered the forest, this time with greater caution. They moved in pairs, their weapons drawn and their visors scanning every inch of their surroundings. These soldiers were different, veterans, judging by their calculated movements and sharp reflexes. Ethan motioned for his team to scatter. We split them up. No head-on fights until they're isolated. Kale melted into the underbrush, his hulking frame vanishing as if he were part of the forest itself. Lucius darted away, his movements so fluid they seemed like whispers of the wind. Ethan remained grounded, his traps carefully set around the clearing. The first pair of soldiers entered the kill zone. Ethan waited, his heartbeat steady as he watched the alien's visor scan for heat signatures. The cloaking agent Lucius had applied still held, rendering them invisible to the alien sensors. One alien's foot pressed down on a hidden trigger. A series of sharpened stakes erupted from the ground, impaling both soldiers in an instant. The forest devoured their cries, leaving only silence behind. Further away, Kale stalked his prey with primal precision. He watched as another pair of Darnok moved cautiously through a thicket. The werewolf let out a low growl, just loud enough to draw their attention. When they turned, he pounced. His claws tore through their armor with ease, their weapons clattering uselessly to the ground. Lucius, meanwhile, had taken a different approach. He had lured his targets into a narrow ravine where visibility was limited. As the Darnok scanned the dark, Lucius appeared behind them, his movements soundless. Before they could react, his talons severed their spines and their lifeless bodies crumpled into the dirt. Ethan regrouped with Kale and Lucius near a fallen log that served as their temporary vantage point. The werewolf's fur was matted with alien blood, and Lucius's crimson eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "They're starting to adapt," Lucius said, his tone measured. "The next wave will be heavier, more drones, stronger soldiers, perhaps even their elites." "Let them adapt," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "We've got the forest, and we've got each other. That's all we need." Kale sniffed the air, his ears twitching. "They're deploying something bigger. I can hear their transport engines." Lucius's expression darkened. "If they're sending transports, they'll be bringing heavy weaponry. The traps alone won't be enough." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll fight smarter. The deeper they come into this forest, the more it turns against them. And if we run out of traps, we've still got claws, fangs, and spears." The three shared a moment of grim understanding. They were vastly outnumbered and outgunned, but none of them had survived this long by surrendering. As the distant roar of transport engines grew louder, Ethan stood tall, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "They think they're fighting prey. Let's remind them what real predators look like." Lucius and Kale nodded, their resolve unshaken. Together, they vanished once more into the shadows of the Blackthorn Forest, ready to show the Darnok that they had underestimated Earth's defenders for the last time. The forest trembled as the Darnok's heaviest weapons descended into its depths. Massive walkers, with legs like steel towers, crushed trees underfoot, their mounted cannons glowing with energy. Drones filled the air in swarms, their buzzing a constant reminder of the overwhelming force descending upon the Blackthorn Forest. This was no longer a hunt. It was an extermination mission. Ethan crouched behind a fallen tree, his eyes scanning the approaching forces. His breathing was steady, his mind focused. "They're bringing everything they have," he said, glancing at Kale and Lucius. "They think this ends here." Kale flexed his claws, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. "Good. I've been itching for a real fight." Lucius, standing calmly at Ethan's side, adjusted the cloak draped over his shoulders. "This isn't a fight," he said coldly. "It's an execution. For them." The trio's preparations had left the forest rigged with every deadly contraption they could devise. Ethan had created choke points and tripwires. Kale had buried spiked pits and sharpened spears in hidden clusters. Lucius had layered the area with a deadly mist of silver-infused powder, engineered to disrupt even the most advanced alien sensors. As the first walker broke through the tree line, its towering form cast a long shadow over the battlefield. The Darnok soldiers moved behind it in formation, their visors scanning for signs of resistance. But the defenders of the forest were already in motion. Kale launched the first attack. With a feral roar, he darted from the underbrush, a blur of muscle and fury. He sprinted toward the walker, evading its heavy plasma shots with inhuman agility. As the machine adjusted its aim, Kale leaped onto one of its massive legs, sinking his claws into the metal. Sparks flew as he climbed toward the cockpit. The Darnock soldiers opened fire, but they didn't see Ethan hidden among the trees. With a sharp whistle, Ethan triggered a line of explosives buried beneath the alien formation. The ground erupted, hurling soldiers and debris into the air. The explosion left a gaping crater, forcing the Darnock into disarray. Lucius seized the opportunity. Emerging from the mist like a wraith, he moved faster than the eye could follow. His claws flashed in deadly arcs, cutting through armor and alien flesh with ease. The Darnock soldiers barely had time to scream before they fell. Kale reached the walker's cockpit, his claws slashing through its protective glass. The alien pilot inside shrieked as Kale yanked it free, tossing it to the ground below. With a guttural growl, Kale ripped out the walker's control systems, sending the massive machine toppling backward into the trees. Ethan regrouped with Kale and Lucius near a narrow gorge they had chosen as their last line of defense. The Darnock forces continued to press forward, their determination unyielding despite their mounting losses. "We've thinned their numbers, but the main force is still coming," Ethan said, wiping sweat and dirt from his brow. Kale nodded, his golden eyes blazing. "Then we keep fighting, one way or another. They don't leave this forest alive." Lucius surveyed the battlefield, his gaze sharp and calculating. "Their commanders are growing impatient. They'll deploy everything they have now, including their elites. Be ready." The ground trembled as a new wave of alien forces advanced. At the center of their formation stood a Darnock commander, clad in ornate black armor and wielding a staff crackling with energy. Its voice boomed through the forest, a guttural language that dripped with malice. Ethan took a deep breath, steadying himself. "That's their leader. If we take it out, the rest will crumble." Kale cracked his knuckles. "I'll handle the big one. You two keep the rest off my back." Lucius smirked, his fangs gleaming. "Try not to take too long. I'd hate to have all the fun without you." The final battle erupted with chaos. Kale charged the Darnock commander, his massive frame crashing through enemy lines like a battering ram. The commander met him head-on, its staff unleashing waves of energy that scorched the ground. Kale dodged and weaved, his claws raking against the alien's armor. Ethan and Lucius worked in tandem, holding off the remaining forces. Ethan's traps continued to thin the Darnock ranks, but the soldiers were adapting quickly. Lucius darted through the chaos, a whirlwind of death. His talons tore through armor and flesh alike, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Kale roared as the commander's staff struck him, sending him crashing into a tree. He shook off the blow, his golden eyes blazing with fury. With a burst of speed, he lunged at the commander, locking it in a deadly grapple. The two titans clashed in a brutal exchange, their blows shaking the earth. Ethan saw an opening. While Kale distracted the commander, he drew his spear and hurled it with all his strength. The weapon found its mark, piercing the alien's exposed neck. The Darnock commander let out a choked scream before collapsing to the ground. The remaining Darnock forces faltered, their morale shattered. Lucius moved in for the kill, dispatching the stragglers with ruthless efficiency. The forest grew quiet once more, the echoes of battle fading into silence. Ethan approached Kale, who stood over the commander's lifeless body. "You all right?" Kale grinned, his fangs still bared. "Never better." Lucius joined them, his cloak tattered but his expression calm. "It's over, for now." Ethan nodded, his gaze sweeping over the battlefield. "They'll send more. This was just a taste of what's coming." Kale clenched his fists. "Then we'll be ready. This forest is ours, and no one takes it from us." Lucius's crimson eyes glimmered in the fading light. "Let them come. They'll learn, as these fools did, that some prey can't be hunted." The three stood together, bloodied but unbroken, as the forest whispered its approval around them. Blackthorn had defended its own, and with its defenders united, it would continue to do so.